Hi, I'm Nolan Hack. I'm a black revolutionary from Los Angeles, California.
I'm SeDerrick. I am a part-time activist, full-time double master's student here in Texas.
And I'm Julie Dye. I'm an anti-mascot activist and water protector from Jackson, Michigan.
Excellent.
All right. So, Mr. Trump decided to do a little more land grabbing of native sacred sites. And it's a million, I read it's a 1.3 million acres that he's looking to take away and unprotect. And of course we have Libya, where we're currently enslaved, and that obviously got ripped apart by the American government of the past administration. We have Nigeria, where our organs are being harvested, which is similar to native children being sold, kidnapped, and then sold and or to having their organs harvested. So even to this day, we still have the things that we're, every human's supposed to have. Those things are taken away, i.e. human rights. But land, quote unquote, rights obviously became a thing in this land after, colonial folks came over. Julie, you're of the three folks on the panel tonight, you're the native person. You want to start us off with your thoughts about native land rights and people being on your land and still taking it away?
Yeah, it never ends. It never ends. And the creation of the reservations, and I mean, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough that they, slaughtered the majority of us and rounded us up and stuck us on reservations. And ever since that minerals and resources were found on the reservation lands, it has never ended. They've always had their eyes on those and continued the assault and continue to whittle down our land. And I don't understand how Trump can have the power to do that on his own, because the land is. I just don't get it. How he can sign a piece of paper and say, "Okay, poof, all this land we're going to, move in and start mining and and drilling," and I just don't understand. I don't get it.
I think it's going to be contested by several different environmental groups. I don't know that this has any precedent. I was looking for one and I couldn't find anything, but I didn't have that long to look. But speaking as a black person, and I knew about the topic before today, obviously, and so I was thinking about it over yesterday and today about how kind of we as black people were brought in to work this quote unquote land, and how we've traditionally been expected to do sorts of manual labor basically for the benefit of mostly not ourselves. I've been reading about farmers after Reconstruction and the things that they were subjected to by their kind of fellow citizens who kind of wanted them to remain at a certain station. So I was kind of thinking about it. It's kind of been a paradox, because on one hand, I feel that I grew up, I think I've said this before, my family traditionally has been very rural. I mean, we have people who live like in major cities, obviously, but like the core of my family has always kind of lived kind of like in rural Louisiana. I feel like if you put my people anywhere, they could, as long as they can farm, they can survive. They've always been very, very self-sufficient in that way. And so I was thinking about how, on one hand, the land has been an overwhelming blessing because I was able to grow up, like I said, eating my grandparents' watermelons and their sweet peas and things that other agricultural goods that kind of come from Africa. And so even though I didn't know it growing up that I was kind of like living in the shadow of our ancestors and practicing, watching my grandparents practice life ways that were similar to what they would have also had in Africa, it's also been a source of pain for us just because of the systems that we were, put into. So it's been, at least for me, I was thinking, and for my family, it's been kind of like this paradox of this land is obviously very, very beautiful and very, very, it provides so many blessings in abundance for different folks, but how, when in the wrong hands, it can also be weaponized, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. There's so much. It's incredible, and you talk about that weaponization. How much oil has been extracted from this earth and this land, especially, and yet we're almost out of it. Like that. That's just it's hard to believe that.
In Africa as well. They're pivoting now to natural gas, which is kind of in this weird, like, I know a lot about this just because I live in Texas and they never stop talking about it. So the natural gas boom has essentially, it's basically like the reason that like we're seeing a lot cheaper prices than we were like at the pump, say like in 2008, 2009, because there's so much of it. That it just kind of changes the game for America in a way that you don't oftentimes see. I think that it's a little bit more environmentally less hard on the, I don't exactly know what the extraction methods are, but I know when you like extract oil from like the Gulf, it can, spill and get all in the water. So I don't think that there's quite that problem, but I do know that it still is a pretty money-intensive thing. Like you have to invest a lot of capital to get those wells going. And ultimately, it's not so green that like it's going to stop or even like put the brakes on global warming. It's still an issue. It just seems to be a little less intensive than oil extraction itself.
Another lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Well, and then that's the other thing. I mean, I'm in Southern California, in Los Angeles right now, and thankfully not where I am exactly or in my vicinity, but still in the Southern California and Los Angeles area, there are some serious, serious fires which can be traced back to global warming. Yet, like even with the land grabbing, you have the powers that be and so many Americans going, well, global warming's fake. No, the native people gave us the land. They willingly just, it was a birthday present. Yeah. So there's this complete delusion of the American experience and how we got to this point. And that land just the destruction of land that isn't even this country's to own is just, it's heartbreaking.
You see the same, I've seen a lot of news reports regarding China and like their works, what they're doing in Africa, and I've been reading a lot of reports on like people who work in like Chinese gold mines and things of that nature. And it's very, very, it's actually kind of creepy how similar it is, just to old school colonialism. And there was this one deal I was reading about. There's so much land in China that is polluted. I think it's like an upwards of 60 to 70%. And they don't have necessarily a lot of land anyway that's arable, that you can farm intensively on. And so it's gotten to the point where they were entering into contracts. I forget what the country, I have to look it up. I'll pull up my Kindle here. But basically the deal was that they get to use their land for agricultural production Like, and it doesn't, even if there's like a drought, even if like natural disasters happen, even if like the own country, like the country's own people are starving, they still have this expectation to be able to use and farm this land, essentially. I honestly feel that like land and water, those are going to be probably two big issues this century, because as more people start being displaced because of climate change, yeah. I mean, I think I saw that it's like up to 300 million people might be dislocated because of climate change.
Oh yeah, easily. Yeah, and you know, I always said when I was a kid, you know, when I was growing up, it was always in a farming community, and I always said, well, people at that time, I'd heard of people buying dirt, you know, for their gardens or whatever, and I thought, wow, I'll never buy dirt, I'll never buy water, and I'll never buy air. That's so stupid. But now we're buying dirt, we're buying water, and after a while we'll probably have to purchase air.
Right.
And it's so sad and so sickening. And what Nolan said, you know, about colonists and settlers just thinking that this is the new world and it's to be it's abundant and it's ours and it's virgin land and you know, that whole thing was such a propaganda, because right now we're fighting with Notre Dame University over their Gregorian murals. There are 12 of them right under the Golden Dome, the main building. As soon as you walk in there, all the students, all the dignitaries, anybody that goes into that main building will see these murals lining the walls, and they're all celebrating Columbus, the discovery of America. And there are native people which don't look like us, even though it's built on Potawatomi land. My tribe ceded that land in the Treaty of Chicago in 1833. And in return, they were supposed to educate our people in perpetuity, which they never did. They never educated. They built an Indian school and an orphanage, and it burnt down, and they never rebuilt it and never lived up to their promise. But anyway, these propaganda murals, they're disgusting, because they've got black people and native people kneeling and worshiping Columbus, and there's a cross behind him, and it's sickening. It's sickening, and they're way up and elevated in the building, and you're looking up at this, and they're all very ornate, very beautiful frames, and you know, it's just propaganda. And to listen to them talk about its art history, and you know, it's valuable, and it's meaningful, and the art historians are such terrorists when it comes to monuments and things like these paintings. Because they don't see it they do see it, but they don't, they're just fronting for the people the racists that want to keep all these things.
Exactly.
And it's just disgusting, you know, and that's through that propaganda that everybody gets it in their mind that, you know, oh wow, you know, this was the new world and we settled it and we tamed it and it's ours, and that whole scenario is just continued because of these monuments and these things that people look up to and think, wow, you know, this is wonderful that my ancestors came here and settled and created this new world.
There's always like because I am fortunate enough to know certain parts of my family's history, and for them to be documented at least more extensively than, say, most folks. I don't think that I have any. I mean, I've had lots of black friends, obviously, over my life, but I don't think I've ever had any of them talk to me specifically about families that, you know, they were owned by or things like that. It never gets that specific. I'm not saying that they're not out there. I'm just saying that I haven't personally had relationships like that. So like when you do know things of that nature, it's a lot easier to kind of see through what is, I guess, propaganda, settler myths, I guess, and then what is the reality. But even in saying that, I think growing up in this society, especially because we don't hear our people talked about consistently, and definitely not with any depth. I was talking to my friend the other day. Sometimes you absorb some of it and you don't realize that you're absorbing it. So I remember hearing the story of Thanksgiving like a couple of years ago and being like, that's not what they taught us in school. I was just thinking that crazily. And I was like, well, of course it's not what they taught you in school. Like, they're not going to tell you, you know, they first celebrated this day after a massacre. That's part of the thing that we face, I think, is educating ourselves, and then we also have to educate our people, because all the things that I know about Africa and like that I know about like African culture and things like that, I had to learn after my undergraduate degree. Like, I had to learn on my own. Like, I took one African history course like my freshman year. I honestly couldn't tell you that much about it. But it's just our people were just not included. And in fact, a lot of the agricultural products that I learned were from Africa, were cultivated in Africa. I learned through this research. And it really just, I don't know, it really encouraged me to no longer take other people's word for it, like not to entrust other people with African like history and perspectives and who we are, because I don't know very many people who like do like even like casual research on Africa and like what's happening there now or in the past. Usually when I hear people talking about Africa, it's usually within this context of, can you believe that this still happens there? And it's completely devoid of any critical analysis, or what might, you know, people like me what might we have done to cause that situation that we're now, you know, going on about, oh, isn't it terrible? But yeah, I guess I wanted to say that because I wanted to encourage folks not to take people's word on it. And then I wanted to ask Nolan for him to elaborate on some of his opinions on the land, because I kind of want to talk about, just very briefly, just Black people and our relationship to this land specifically, because this was a conversation I had with one of my professors.
Well, when I was younger, and I would say mostly unaware of just the whole colonial situation, while still understanding that, you know, Black folks are still being screwed over, and slavery was horrendous, but I had it in my mind that the land in America was, everything was for sale. If you wanted a house, if you wanted if you lived in New York, you wanted an apartment to buy. If you wanted to buy a storefront for your business, whatever. And while that is true, only sticking with that mindset of capitalism and colonialism and this land being, you know, viable property, American ideals, it just erases what's under the surface, which is, wait a minute, like the talk with folks discussing Jerusalem right now, and people are like, well, Jerusalem is Israel, and it's for Israel, it's for Israelites, it's for the Jewish people. And then you go, wait a minute, actually that is Palestinian land, that is their land. So here, all this stuff is native land, it's indigenous land. I live on Tongva lands in Los Angeles, in the LA area. This is Tongva land, this is still be theirs. And that's a tough thing to kind of try to get, a tough way of thinking to try to get out of, because, like you said, we're taught this one narrative for years and years and years, and even as adults, even if we're watching television, I'm driving down the street seeing billboards, whatever, because you want to be a part of that materialistic society. You want to buy that. You want to have this. You want to own that. You want, and then you even go into relationships. If you are a man, a straight man, like, I want that woman. I want her to take my name, take my ring, and then I own her. At least subconsciously, that's what you're thinking. And with the fracking of natural gas, the counter argument is, well, we're running out of resources, so natural gas is the way to go. And that, as you eloquently put it, that there is a lot more natural gas left on this planet than oil that's still doing irreparable harm to the planet. But again, when you're in that materialistic mindset, you're like, well, wait a minute. We need to drive our cars. We need to power our businesses. So we need the natural gas. But if you were doing things the way the original people of this land were doing things, and in some ways still are, thankfully some traditions have been kept and are still practiced, you wouldn't need natural gas. You wouldn't need to dig into the ground. And that's why the phrase, keep it in the ground, water is life, that's why those phrases exist, because they're true. If you don't hold those ideals, then you're going to go down a path where all these movies that we've been seeing in the last 10, 15 years, where there's, Earth is a wasteland, and we got to move to Mars, or we got to move, to another galaxy. That's going to be the way you're going to have to go.
So I think I wanted to just mention briefly, because I think I've told you before about a class that I took. It was called Indigenizing Queer Theory. It was the last year of my time at UT. It was taught by, I believe she's Dakota, Professor Tallbear. She's probably the most influential professor that I had in all of my time at university. And that's kind of saying something, seeing as, like I said, I took her my last semester of undergrad. But it was because she challenged so many of those notions. And we weren't even necessarily talking about like land or land ownership directly. We were talking about queer people as they've kind of presented themselves in indigenous societies, including ones in Africa, throughout time. And I remember her asking, after this class, because I kept up with her afterwards, and I was just listening to an interview that she was doing, she was saying that she didn't know what relationship, she would be very interested to hear, but she didn't know what kind of relationship the descendants of former slaves had to the land. She would be really interested in hearing us talk about it. And since then, I've kind of been pondering that, because I feel like I have some type of relationship, but it was nothing that I ever like consciously spoke about or thought about, because I feel that our Black people, for the most part, I feel have gone from like crisis to crisis. So like we deal with one system of unfreedom to another, and so I don't know if we've actually sat down and thought about what has been my relationship to that. And so part of what I was saying earlier about the watermelons and the agricultural goods that Africans have been known to create has kind of been a step in my kind of reasoning what my relationship to this place is or has been throughout time. So I guess at this moment, it feels like I have a certain duty to protect as much as I can, because like I said, if you were to experience something as like traumatic as slavery, but like the one silver lining, even if you didn't know it directly, was that like the place that you were going would support, a life way that you would, find similar, that you would recognize. I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that's a blessing. That's not the only reason that the land is worth protecting, of course, but I was just trying to put it in very personal means, like what has it meant to our family? How has it, yeah. So I think part of our conversations about decolonization have to also, kind of dispel, not just in Black people's minds, but this notion in probably everybody's mind these days of kind of like ownership of land as it is traditionally seen here in the West, or in Western societies and Western cultures. I was doing some preliminary research, and I also found that, like, in places like Ghana, lots of places in West Africa, you technically cannot own land anymore. And of course, those laws came up after people came over and never wanted to leave, and felt that they had the right to extract whatever resources they wanted for however long that they wanted. So I think now it's like in Ghana, I was seeing this, like, you can own a property for up to 99 years, and then you have an option to renew, I think, with like a fee or something. It's something to that effect. But I was really, really interested. I found it really, really interesting that, like, post-colonialism, and Africa still lives in a state of colonialism. Just because the people aren't there on the ground doesn't mean that Africa is quote-unquote free. But I found it really, really interesting that as soon as they got them gone, they were like, all right, not doing that again.
There's a quote from an article I've read about how the land in Africa is similar to here in the United States and on Turtle Island, is just being destroyed, and the soil being destroyed. And there's a quote in that article from an elder, and he says, there's nothing we can do about it. They want our land. And SeDerrick, he said that it's beautiful that of all the places that we could have been dragged off to, that we ended up here and are able to take similar talents to indigenous people as far as farming and irrigation goes, that we're so similar. Our one, even from the depressing thought of our two genocides are so similar, the plights are so similar, I would say to a degree our uniqueness is similar, if that makes any sense, because we're able to do these incredible things that, especially, let's just talk about white folks, that white folks are so jealous of, whether it's the nappy hair or the braided hair, and I think that's, like you said, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and we should not reject this. I think we should embrace it, because when you have this many similarities with another person or another group, it only makes sense to befriend the other side.
The defensiveness, and I haven't spoken to very many Black people about this. I do run a group, the African Diaspora. It actually kind of just started, I started like the actual page, and then I started like a private group where I was just really going to share with like family and friends like articles, papers and stuff that I would find on politics that I found that it was important for them to know, because while my family is politically active, they're raising kids, they're not quite as interested and adept to it as I am. So I was like, oh, well, this is a good way that I can kind of talk to them about issues and kind of leave things for them kind of in one space. And so some of the questions I've heard come up about this naturally do concern, well, what happens to the people who are descendants of slaves once Native people get their land back, because that's what I support. But I do understand that hesitancy or like that fear. I don't want to, sometimes I feel that people have spoken about it in a really flippant manner, and I think if you were just to honestly, like if you were to see my grandparents and like how they are not wealthy, they don't have any I mean, my great-grandmother can't even depend on the state for Social Security. Like, she was left out of that. She has my great-grandfather's check, but she doesn't have one of her own because maids were not initially included in Social Security. See, I could see how someone coming from that circumstance could be like, okay, and so now we're also not going to have a place to live. But I would just, and it can be a little harder sometimes because I didn't have like any books that I could refer people to, or that spoke about native conceptions of land, about like how nobody owned land, how they belong to the land, they have a relationship with the land. Like, I feel that if we had more of those sources, we might be able to go even faster. Because I honestly feel that that's like the major hang up. It's not that Black people want to dominate or want to exploit the resources in the same way that white people do. But I've said this many times before as well. I've felt all my life that what Black people really want to do is like escape this constant gaze that we're under. Some people refer to it as like hypervisibility. Some people mistakenly think that it's like a good thing, or like that it's something that is kind of responsible for, you know, our presence in media. And while it might be a part of that, much more that hypervisibility is what feeds the police state. Is what justifies the imprisoning of Black bodies. It works to, you know, make you guilty before anyone even knows what the story is. You don't even know what all the details are on any given case on the news, but you'll know that, oh, he wasn't a good father, or he got suspended from school, or, you know, you look at any story involving a Black person, and like it starts from day one. There's this constant like assassination of their character, and it gets you to the point where you presuppose their guilt. What Black people really want, I feel, or I felt many times, is to escape that. And so I try to, when I address this issue, I always try to do it from the vantage point, not where like I'm giving up my principle, but where I do acknowledge, hey, I do understand where that comes from, or where that fear comes from. Because, I mean, we're for open now. My cousin had a Facebook post about 2 weeks ago, actually, where she was just talking about how on her way back from work, like there was a police officer on every single one of the streets. And how most of our family now lives out in the country. It used to be just like our elderly relatives, and now it's pretty much everyone, because you can't live in the city.
It's interesting that you say that, because I don't know if you've heard of the news here in Michigan. John Conyers, congressman, just resigned from office over sexual harassment accusations, and he's recommending his son to replace him in Congress, and then right away, I mean, within hours of him making that statement, they came back and said, well, his son was, and I don't know how long ago this happened, but said his son was assaulted his wife or pointed a gun at his wife's head or something in the past. I mean, that was the first thing. I didn't even know his son's name. I didn't know where he lived or anything about him, but that's the first thing I learned about him. Wow.
Anytime there's a shooting here in Texas, I already know what's going to happen. Like, I already know what the narrative is. A lot of times, I mean, I've kind of just stopped watching the news, and I've kind of like unfollowed people and just like changed my timeline so that I don't see those videos, because
I
already know what it is.
Yeah, I don't need to see the public lynchings. I mean, about a few months ago, my cousin, one of my cousins took me out for my birthday, and like, you want to see a movie? I'm like, yeah. He's like, all right, pick the movie. So I was trying to pick one, a very well-rated and reviewed movie, and two, something where I can escape colonialism and, you know, intergenerational trauma, that whole 9 yards, I picked the new Planet of the Apes movie, or the newest one. Big mistake. Because I don't know if you've seen the movie.
I've never seen any of the Planet of the Apes.
Well, this one, of course, there's the correlation: black people, monkeys, black people, monkeys. That's in the world we live in. That's what they continue to put up everywhere and make people think. But in the movie, the monkeys are slaves. There's a prison camp. They're whipping the monkeys. They're saying things. They even Woody Harrelson's character, the general, the basically they're Hitler who they follow, even brought up Custer. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. I was full on crying during the film because that intergenerational trauma has never, even to this day since then, been triggered like it was that night, because there's so many different things. They had the monkeys hung up on pieces of wood sticking out of the ground. Of course, that reminds you of lynching, stuff around the chains around their neck. But, you know, it was almost like every example and correlation and comparison to slavery and even native genocide as well was in the movie. And yeah, you can't escape that narrative in this country at all if you watch movies or television or the news or what have you. They've even done studies where it shows that especially you talk about the local news, there's so much discussion about, young black youth, young black man did this wrong. He did this. That's what they show so often, even though, well, there's that whole discussion if we're talking about reality. Well, what about white on white crime? What about what the government's doing to black people? What about what they created, what is the hoods? You know, and same thing with the reservation.
There are many studies that demonstrate that the amount of time that black people take up on like newscasts far exceeds like what their share of like proportion or participation in crime would even like somewhat merit. So yeah,
it's like the Connors thing. The president of the United States is a probable rapist, probable child rapist. But no, we will never discuss that either. We will never discuss that ever, whether it's from the Democratic side or the Republican side or, you know, the news media. But a black congressman's son trying to replace him, that's the first thing we're going to talk about, domestic violence. That's the first thing, violence against women. And it should be talked about. That should be the first thing talked about if someone's running for office and they actually did that, sure. But that's not what happens with white folks versus people of color, especially black or indigenous folks.
Even when they were trying to get him to step down, Nancy Pelosi, I don't know if she has as of yet, but she wasn't at first calling for Al Franken's resignation. And I kind of felt that and I do think that he should step down, but I kind of felt that she was focusing in on him so much because she didn't want to bring up Al Franken, who at that time like had like 6 or 7 allegations, and I think this today like makes the 8th. So there's supposed to be an announcement about that, which will likely be that he is stepping down. But it seemed very apparent to me that she was focusing in on him because she didn't want to call for Al Franken's resignation. And they should all resign, but don't just pick on him because you don't want to tell your friend that he should go too.
I think that's the other thing. The floodgates will open, just like you've seen in Hollywood. If you get Franken out, then you got to get another one out. Then you got to get another one out. And obviously, most of the people in office, as it always has been in this country, white men, white men, white men, white men, white men, and white men. The what is it? The 42nd president of the United States, probable rapist. 45th president of the United States, probable rapist. We'll never talk about that on either side of the aisle. Never. We'll never. And the person who was married to the 42nd has said herself, any woman who is comes out with a story about sexual assault needs to be listened to. Yet your husband, no, shut all them down.
When it's in your house, it's always different when it happens to you. Yeah.
Glass houses and the whole, yeah. Well, this is a good segue into the second topic. there has been a rift, and obviously the continued rift between indigenous and black folks with the infighting. But the current topic of discussion and the current thing rocking the boat is settler politics. And while I don't identify, even though I guess you could say a lot of my ideology is leftist, like I don't identify as a leftist or a communist or Marxist or whatever, but a lot of indigenous folks are upset because, like, wait a minute, we had politics before all this stuff happened, yet you're forcing settler politics down our throat. And I'll even add to that white politics, because whether you agree with Marxism or not, that it was invented by a white guy, and that is to this day called Marxism. It's not called Abdul Jamalism. It's called Marxism. It's a white guy who invented it. This is white politics, and it's very, from my standpoint, I think it's very interesting, even at the base of it, because you have capitalism. That's the politics that this country holds dear, and it's obviously the whole decolonizing movement of the day. Well, we don't want any of that. We don't want any of that. But so often, and this is from my standpoint, I see people of color, talking about especially black folks, going towards white politics, even though you go, like with indigenous folks, go back to before all this happened. We had our own way of doing things, but we gravitate more towards, settler politics. But I'll just open that for discussion.
Julie, you want to go ahead? You want to go first?
Well,
it's okay if
I just think that we've gone so far, and we've been raised, assimilated, and had to survive and do things to survive, and we have a lot of the politics. Tribal politics between tribes is different, because we have some of the more isolated tribes, like out west, the Pueblos and Navajos. They're much more traditional, much more isolated. I mean, they have to participate in politics, of course, to negotiate with the government and everything else, but the rest of us that just kind of got bulldozed and run over by settlers and boarding school, ethnic cleansing, and what have you. I mean, as far as governments go, our tribal government, for my tribe, runs itself like a business with a board of directors, and have not implemented or tried to re-implement any other methods. I know our tribal courts have implemented some of the older methods of dealing with criminals that go through the system, the tribal court system, and many of the other tribes in Michigan are doing the same. But as far as traditional politics or traditional governmental entities, that's a thing of the past that I don't think we're going to go back to. It's just that there's too much competition and there's too much assimilation, and we're just cemented into the ways of the government, and how they operate, and we're so closely tied to them with all the programs and all of the attachments with the land in trust situation. The federal government, this situation we're in with them, it's just I just don't see anything happening with that.
Well, from your standpoint as a Native person, first of all, you have, like you just said, you have these American politics shoved down your throat, but then would you call it insult to injury when you have another group of people, even if it is people of color, or if it's white leftists or whomever, trying to go, hey, no, listen to this. You need to believe in these ideals and this politics, this type of politics, especially when it's those politics were created by white folks. I mean, would you call that insult to injury, or what would you call it?
Yeah, I don't. That's very confusing. Very confusing. I don't. It's so somebody's just trying to sell you a different bunch of wares, basically. So I don't know. I'd be very suspicious of somebody like that, just because we're suspicious of white people in general for anything they're trying to sell. So I wouldn't necessarily go for something like that.
I didn't really hear a lot about like Marxism or that kind of political theory growing up where I grew up. I kind of always attribute that to being kind of in the South and people being a lot more conservative. My politics definitely lean left, but I don't, and I've said this before, I don't really consider myself to be someone who's particularly ideological in the sense that like there's nothing that like I'm so beholden to that like it has to be this, or anything else, or nothing else, or I'm not going to take anything off. So part of going back and kind of trying to educate myself has not only been in regards to Africa and Native people, but it's also been to certain political cultures, socialism, Marxism kind of being one. But it's kind of had to take a back seat just because the African and Native histories are so kind of prominent and so important for me to understand, I feel. But a good friend with mine, probably Will, he gave me a book on Kwame from Africa, so I'm going to read his book, or get through it at least, because I do want to learn about other ways of thinking. I will say a lot of the hesitancy I had about it was that, Marx is a white guy, just like these other capitalists are white guys, and I don't know what his ability to set up a system that's going to work for African or African descendant people. I don't know, how beneficial his thoughts or theories might be, but I am willing to just learn and just read about something just from that perspective. And that's assuming that I didn't have like left-leaning tendencies, and I do. But I kind of hate how when you get into things like that, especially here, people immediately want to put you in this position where you have to like, oh, so are you for like the Soviet Union or all this other stuff? And it's like, I'm not about to defend stuff like that. Like, I'm not going to take it upon myself to start defending those systems because A, I wasn't there. B, I can't really differentiate like what was American propaganda, what actually was happening on the ground. And I think that it's actually difficult for most people to be able to do that. So I just want something, I want a system for people to be able to live in where they feel that they are in control of their lives. I don't know, the way that we kind of just casually accept things here, like the gun debate. Like we pretty much accepted that there's just going to be like this unchecked political violence, gun violence, excuse me, and that there's really nothing that we can do. Every like mass shooting, we talk about it for 1 or 2 days, and then, I mean, we just move on because like there's nothing else to do. The House actually just passed legislation today that's supposed to make it easier for you to carry guns across states. So I just don't like living in a system like that where it's, well, there's nothing that we can do to change it because ultimately it's not our decision. Like there are all these moneyed interests that want to keep this the way that it is. So.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, any human just wants to live and be free. We have a very simplistic set of demands that obviously the powers that be have blown out of proportion. Mm-hmm. And you said, Marx is a white guy for one, and I think what people either put aside or they don't know about. I mean, Marx was himself a racist. Mm-hmm. I mean, and his word. These are his words. Actually, I'll read them very quickly. He's describing a German socialist. This Marx's words. It is now clear to me that, as proven by the shape of his head and the growth of his hair, he stems from the Negroes who joined the march of Moses out of Egypt. If his mother or grandfather on his father's side did not mate with a nigger. Now, this comparison of Jewry, and Germanism with the Negroid, it's like we're a robot or something, Negroid basic substance must bring forth a particular product. The pushiness of this lad is also nigger-like. So from, again, my standpoint, everybody can believe whatever the heck they want, especially as beaten down as we are as people of color. But I cannot subscribe to a set of politics, especially ones that are named after a man who thinks of us as, thought of us as second class. Even though he did come out against slavery, it's kind of that white liberal thing of, yeah, I don't think you should be slaves. I don't, I don't want to actually kill you outright, but I'm better than you. I can't subscribe to that. But even if I could, I would not want to ram my ideals down the throats of the people that this land should still belong to, and the so many different sets of politics that used to be practiced all throughout Turtle Island. And what I personally want, I want to get back to what we used to do, and I'm speaking as a black person and for black folks. And I don't mean, a lot of black liberals say, well, when the Democratic Party, well, no, none of that. I don't mean Marxism. I mean black politics in Africa before white folks came over. Centralized politics, people governing people, not systems in the sky or elitism overpowering the people on the ground. But that's just my...
I think you can just leave it like that. I don't think that you even have to say, like, before white people came. Like, I'm obviously very interested in the past, but I don't necessarily want people to try to recreate everything that ever existed from the past. And I'm not talking about any, like, political system in particular. Just because I don't know if all of that stuff will work here today in the world that we live in now. And more than I want that, I just want black people to be able to live with self-determination, making their own decisions with borders or not with borders that they have, chosen, not by colonial powers. I mean, there's always been like this reverence for the ancestors in African spirituality, and that is important, but I think that can sometimes lead, it depends on how you take it. If you consider your ancestors to be kind of very progressive and to always kind of be trying to advance us as a people, then I feel like it can be progressive. But I feel like for some people, that can also become a regressive mindset to slip into. Because some of the things that they might think that our ancestors would want aren't necessarily things that we know, like there are people, and these people haven't studied very hard, but who say, oh, homosexuality didn't exist in Africa. Of course it did. Of course it did. Long before Europeans ever set foot there. But to them, going back to what our ancestors did is not having that. So, I mean, there are a lot of problems with that statement, but because I don't know if I'm going to be able to debate every single one of those people and convince them, I just try to present it in a way that gives all of us the self-determination that we deserve, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I don't think any of that's going to happen until minorities become the majority in this country.
Which isn't that far off. That isn't that far off. I think from even from a minimum, I think we should plan for that and formulate for that, because it's much easier to have a plan of action whenever day happens for what you're trying to build, whatever it is, than you not having a set of plans for when the day happens, and you gotta now we gotta set everything up, and now we gotta get something together. And I think what's key, and one reason why I'm blessed to be a part of this weekly roundtable, is having our two people go back and forth and continue to formulate, because I don't think any of us from a majority want to be like, all right, you know what, screw you, I'm going back to my house, you go back to yours, I'm going to do things my way, you can do things your way. So we need to coexist, and we need to formulate ideas on how to do that. And I think, and from what you said, SeDerrick, in terms of not trying to regress, and obviously most folks, like with any form of politics, don't know exactly what the true ideology is. So when you have brother sister talk about Kenyan politics back in 1283, it's not going to be what not going to be exactly correct. But I do think we should kind of evolve what we did practice back then, kind of like how the movement in general, you talk about Fred Hampton, Sitting Bull, Sojourner Truth, whomever, we take their lead, we go, okay, well, we live now, it's 2017, we go on the path that they set for us, and obviously we're the ones living now, so we can do this however we want, but then just go from there and take the lessons and the teachings, in this case the politics, and move forward with those as our compass. Agreed.
I think it's basically finding the paths that are right for us today. Like, I understand, like, this is kind of on a different topic. It's kind of hard, especially like with issues like global warming, to ask like people who live in kind of like countries like China and stuff like that. It's kind of hard to ask them to, not use fossil fuels as much, because they want to have a lifestyle equivalent to what they've seen folks have. So it's kind of hard to ask people to take less and to do less. I am hoping that things like nuclear fusion, is it fusion or fission? I think it's fusion, because I think fission is what that don't produce like the greenhouse gases and things of that nature. I'm hoping that will mean that people will be able to have that lifestyle. Like, I'm not saying that no one else should be able to drive a car or should be able to, have what we consider a quote-unquote modern lifestyle, but it's about finding a way for us to all be able to do that and for us to still have a planet.
And there are alternative forms of energy that are very viable. It's just the system does not want to do that. It's not profitable for them, or they just don't agree with it. And I think that is all a part of decolonizing, finding the best ways to, one, protect the planet and protect ourselves. And we are living on native land, and a native ideal, I think, I have not seen one nation that doesn't believe in this, is protect the earth, protect the planet, and learn from it and be of it, not destroy it, not pillage it, not rip it apart for our own gain. but actually be simpatico with the land.
Well, I think that comes from just that idea that everything on the earth is yours. And like you were given, quote unquote, dominion. That's kind of like what the Bible preaches, that man was given dominion.
Manifest destiny.
Over the earth. That's kind of one of the things that I've always kind of really disliked about the Abrahamic traditions. I'm not trying to, shit on anyone's religion. I don't have any problem with, Christians or Jewish people or Islamic people, but that's just, it's such a, and then when I think about like all of the things that those three groups in particular have been involved with around the world, I'm just like,
well, yeah, that's
you got to escape some of these ideologies.
Yeah,
it is a whole other topic, but we got to escape some of those mind frames that kind of suggest that like other things and other people only exist for like your society's benefit, or even what like worse, your own personal benefit. The great planters,
even enslavement of animals for like these farm factories, and animals only exist for profit and gain, and I'm speaking for the native populations. We have so many dysfunctions from all the trauma and the messed up history that we've had. We have difficulty within our own tribal politics. I mean, because of, the crab in the bucket theory, where one guy's trying to climb up on top of the other guy to, have something more than the guy at the bottom of the bucket. And I mean, we have a lot of dysfunction when it comes to tribal governments, and we're going to have to overcome that, because it's a mix. It's a mix of, the traditional way of thinking, and then you've got the capitalism coming in and, make money and take whatever you can by whatever means. And so, we've got a mixture of that, and I don't know, it's going to be difficult overcoming that.
Especially when everyone else kind of lives by those principles.
Right.
So it's like, how can you ask like other people not to do that if everyone around them is, or they feel like they're going to somehow suffer in their, I guess, quality of life, like their quality of life is going to go down if they don't use fossil fuels. Or Arlington, Texas, where I went to high school, it was I think it was the largest city without public transportation. It might still be. I heard they voted for it, but basically there were a lot of big oil interests there in that city, like Vandergriff and a bunch of other like big money car people had for years and years and years, like defeated any like public ballot to introduce like public means of transportation, because that metroplex is huge, and really to be able to live there, you have to be able to afford to drive, unless you live in Dallas, which I do think has public transit, but in a very specific locale. So to be able to live in that metroplex, you have to be able to drive. And it's a big sprawling, and that's what Texas loves, like these big sprawling metroplexes that span. It would take me like 30 minutes from my house to get to like my best friend's house. And it's like a typical drive for me. And that's all to increase, the consumption of oil.
Well, I think one key thing, and I wholeheartedly believe this, is no matter what your political beliefs, your religious beliefs, even your own spirituality, whether you believe in religion or not, is how you tie into the planet. And I think for both of us, we need to remember who we are, just from a very basic standpoint, and what we used to, how we used to live, And I don't mean like take everything bare bones and like, okay, no cars, no, I don't mean that. I just mean how we thought day to day and how we treat other people day to day, instead of consume, buy, consume, knock that person out of the way to get the last Christmas present for my, my niece.
Exactly.
And one thing that kind of irks me is the ways we did things. And obviously, you have one huge piece of land in Africa with many different nations, and one huge piece of land in Turtle Island and also South America, many different nations. But we did a lot of amazing things, whether politics, agriculture, what have you. But and Julie, you said it, we're so far away from that because we're so assimilated into this culture, Western culture, white culture, consumerism, capitalism. But I guess since we're at the hour, I want to pose the last word and the last question to you, Julie, is just SeDerrick and I have both stated what we want, politics to look like in our own societies, the black communities. What is your wish for how do you want politics to look as far as Native communities, or at least within your own nation?
I would like to see them go for environmental protection. In fact, I'm going to be addressing some things with our Elders Council and trying to influence our Tribal Council in that direction, and to push for protection of the land, and anything that we acquire, and bringing back the good food, the good seeds, less use of farm pesticides, pollutants, less use of plastics and styrofoam in any of our businesses, just to get that mindset going. And, we have to be renewable. We're ruining our own land that we're sitting on. And if it's reservation land, you have nowhere to go. You've ruined your piece of land, you're done. I mean, that's just the case of it. And in this situation where Trump wants to bring all these companies into mine and do all this destruction on and near reservation land and drilling and polluting, and that just goes against everything that we stand for. And it's disgusting because, like I said, pretty soon we'll have to buy air because everything is going to be polluted. I don't know why people stand for it, and why they don't why they're not out in droves protesting all these companies. It just boggles my mind. I mean, I do everything in my own household to recycle and to not consume and throw everything away and reuse and as much as I possibly can. But other people are just like, use it one day, throw it out, and buy new, and until the landfills are full and barges are full of plastic, and the ocean is, plastic piles up 10 feet high on the beaches, and it's so wrong. I just can't. I don't see how people can turn the blind eye and just turn their head away from all the pollution.
I was going to just say really quickly that this culture has always seemed to be willing to trade what they perceive as potential government tyranny for, I guess, the tyranny of corporations. I've noticed that several times throughout history. It's okay, well, tyranny from the government, or the government telling you what to do, is supposed to be bad, but somehow it's better if this giant oil company tells me that there's no problem with global warming, or just even the way that we just take the word of rich people, how certain people flock to Donald Trump because he's like rich. Or like I'll listen to certain political analysis and they'll go, oh, well, this is a political shakeup. You know, Donald Trump won the presidency. It's not political shakeup at all. Like, people here have always been enamored by like that wealthy planter class, like from the beginning.
There you go.
It's not like new at all. I don't know what it is about that. It also makes me very grateful that my grandfather raised me not to. You need money to live, obviously, in this world, but not to love money, not to have a love of money.
You get caught up in the wrong things. You take the wrong things to heart. You know, you're not just supposed to love money. You're supposed to love people. You know,
exactly.
And this government and society, people not high on the priority list. But this has been, I think, like last week, one of our better discussions, and I hope to see both of you next week on the, what would it be, the 13th?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I will be here. My sister graduates college next week as well, so I'm really excited about
Congratulations.
that. Yeah, she's gonna be a nurse, a pediatric nurse.
Nurses are great. They need to get paid more. Hospitals would not survive without nurses.
No, they would not.
You too. You all have a great week as well. Take care, y'all.
Okay. You guys too. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.